Chapter 14, Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. There had been nothing for the Tucks to do but go to bed. It was too dark now to go out looking for the horse thief, and anyway, they had no idea when he had done this thieving, or where he had gone. "That beats all, though, don't it, Pa?" said Jessie, coming up to a person's house and stealing their horse right out from underneath their nose. "I got to give you that," said Tuck. "But the question is, was it just some ordinary thief, or was it someone that had some special reason? I don't like it. I got a bad feeling about the whole thing." "Hush now, Tuck," said May. She was spreading a quilt on the old sofa and making it into a bed for Winnie. "You're too much of a worrier. There's nothing we can do about it now, so there's no sense fussing. You got no reason to think there's anything peculiar about it. Anyway, come on, we'll get a good night's sleep and figure it out in the morning when we're fresh. Boys, up you go, and don't get to talking. You'll keep us awake. Winnie, child, you bed down, too. You'll sleep first rate on the sofa there." But Winnie did not sleep at all, not for a long, long time. The cushions of the sofa were remarkably lumpy and smelled like old newspaper, and the chair pad May had given her for a pillow was thin and hard and rough under her cheek. But far worse than that was the fact that she was still in her clothes, for she had firmly refused the offer of May's spare nightgown, with its seeming miles of faded cotton flannel. Only her own nightgown would do, and the regular bedtime routine. Without them she was painfully lonely for home. Her joy on the road that morning had completely disappeared. The wide world shrank, and her oldest fears rolled freely in her consciousness. It was unbelievable that she should be in this place. It was an outrage, but she was helpless to do anything about it, helpless to control it, and exhausted by the conversation in the rowboat. Was it true? Could they really never die? These Tucks? It had evidently not occurred to them that she might not believe it. They were only concerned that she keep the secret. Well, she did not believe it. It was nonsense, wasn't it? Well, wasn't it? Winnie's head whirled. Remembering the man in the yellow suit was the only thing that kept her from weeping. "He's told them by now," she thought, rehearsing it. "They've been looking for me for hours, but they don't know where to look. No, the man saw which way we were headed. Pa will find me. They're out looking for me right now." She went over it again and again, lying wrapped in the quilt, while outside the moon rose, turning the pond to silver. There was a hint of mist, now that the air was cooler, and the frogs talked comfortably. Crickets soon joined in with their shrill, rhythmic song. In the table drawer the mouse rustled softly, enjoying the supper of flapjack crumbs May had put there for him, and the last three things were clearer in Winnie's ears than the voice of her thoughts. She began to relax, listen to the sound-filled silence. Then, just as she drifted into sleep, she heard soft footsteps, and May was beside her. "You're resting easy, child?" she whispered. "I'm all right, thank you," said Winnie. "Sorry about everything," said May. "I just didn't know no other way but to bring you back with us. I know it ain't very happy for you here, but, well, anyway, you had a good talk with Tuck?" "I guess so," said Winnie. "That's good. Well, I'm going back to bed. Get a good night's sleep." "All right," said Winnie. But still May lingered. When we've been gone a long time," she said at last. "I guess we don't know how to do with visitors. But still and all, it's a good feeling, you being here with us. I wish you was ours." She put out an awkward hand and touched Winnie's hair. "Well," she said, "good night." "Good night," said Winnie. Tuck came to a little later to peer down at her anxiously. He was wearing a long white nightshirt, and his hair was rumpled. "Oh," he said, "you still awake? Everything all right?" "Yes," said Winnie. "I didn't mean to go disturbing you," he said, "but I've been lying there thinking I ought to be sitting out here with you till you went to sleep." "You don't have to do that," said Winnie, surprised and touched. "I'm all right." He looked unconcerned. "Well, but if you want something, will you holler? I'm just in the next room. I'd be here like a shot." And then he added gruffly, "It's been quite a long time since we had a natural growing child in the house." His voice trailed off. "Well, try to get some sleep. That sofa there, I guess it ain't that kind of thing you're used to." "It's fine," said Winnie. "The bed's no better, or I'd switch with you," he said. He didn't seem to know how to finish the conversation. But then he bent and kissed her quickly on the cheek and was gone. Winnie lay with her eyes wide. She felt cared for and confused. and all at once she wondered what would happen to the Tucks when her father came. What would he do to them? She would never be able to explain how they had been with her, how they made her feel. She remembered guiltily that at supper she had decided they were criminals. Well, but they were, and yet... And then a final visitor made her confusion complete. There was a creaking on the loft stairs, and Jessie was looking down at her, very beautiful and eager in the faint blue moonlight. "Hey, Winnie," Foster, he whispered. "You asleep?" This time she sat up, pulling the quilt around her in sudden embarrassment, and answered, "No, not yet." "Well, then, listen." He knelt beside her, his curls tumbled in her eyes wide. "I've been thinking it over. Pa's right about you having to keep that secret. It's not too hard to see why. But the thing is, you knowing about the water already and living right next to it, so's you could go there any time. Well, listen, how'd it be if you was to wait till you're 17, same age as me? Heck, that's only 6 years off, and then you can go and drink some, and then you could go away with me. We could go get married. Even that'd be pretty good, wouldn't it? We could have a grand old time, go all around the world, see everything. Listen, Mom, Pa, Miles, they don't need to know how to enjoy it, what we got. Why, heck, Winnie, life's to enjoy yourself, ain't it? What else is good for? That's what I say. And you and me, we could have a good old time and never stop. Wouldn't that be something?" Once more Winnie adored him, kneeling there beside her in the moonlight. He wasn't crazy. How could he be? He was just amazing. But she was struck dumb. All she could do was stare at him. "You think on it, Winnie Foster," Jessie whispered earnestly. "Think on it some and see if you don't sound good. Anyway, I'll see you in the morning." All right, she managed to whisper in return. He slipped away then, back up the creaking steps, but Winnie sat upright, wide awake, her cheeks burning. She could not deal with this remarkable suggestion, and she could not think on it, for she didn't know what to believe about anything. She lay down again finally and stared into the moonlight for another hour and a half before she fell asleep. Chapter 15. In Tree Gap, the same moonlight silvered at the roof of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, but inside the lamps were burning. "That's right," said the man in the yellow suit. "I know where she is." He sat back in the chair in the Foster's spotless parlor, crossing his long, thin legs, and the suspended foot began a rhythmic jiggling. He hung his hat on his knee and smiled, his eyes nearly closed. "I follow them, you see. She's with them now. As soon as I saw they had arrived at their destination, I turned around and came directly back. I thought you'd be staying up. You've been looking for her all day, of course. It must be quite a worry." He lifted a hand then, ignoring their exclamations, and began to smooth the thin hairs of his beard. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've come a long way looking for a good exactly like the one you've got next door here. Looking for a wood exactly like the one you've got next door here. It would mean a great deal to me to own it. And how pleasant to have neighbors like yourself. Now, I understand I wouldn't cut down many of the trees. I'm no barbarian, you can see that. No, just a few. You wouldn't find it different at all, really." He gestured with his long white fingers and smiled, his face crinkling pleasantly. "We'd be good friends, I think. Why, the little girl and I, we're friends already. It would be a great relief to see her safely home again, wouldn't it?" He clicked his tongue and frowned. "Dreadful thing, kidnapping. Isn't it a fortune that I was a witness? Why, without me you might never have heard a word. They're rough country people, the ones that took her. There's just no telling what illiterates like that might do. Yes," he sighed, lifting his eyebrows and smiling again. It looks as if I'm the only person in the whole world who knows where to find her." And then the man in the yellow suit sat forward. His long face took on a hard expression. "Now, I don't have to spell things out for you people like yourselves. Some types come across can't seem to cut their way through any problem, and that does make things difficult. But I don't have to explain the situation to you. I've got what you want, and you've got what I want. Of course, you might find that child without me, but you might not find her in time. So I want the wood, and you want the child. It's a trade, a simple, clear-cut trade." He looked around at the three shocked faces, and as if they were seeing nothing there but calm agreement, he smiled delightfully and rubbed his hands together. "Done and done," he said. "I knew right away. I said to myself, now there's a group of intelligent, reasonable people. I'm seldom wrong as a judge of character. Very seldom disappointed. So All that remains is to write it up on paper, give me the wood, and to sign it. It's best, don't you agree, to keep things legal and tidy? The rest is easy. Nothing to it. You go for your local constable, and he and I ride out and bring back the child and the criminals." "Oh, no, no, Mr. Foster, I understand your concern. But you mustn't come along. We'll do this business my way. There, now. Your terrible ordeal is good as over, isn't it? I'm so thankful I was here to help you out." I'll read chapter 16 and 17 tomorrow.